want to hear about these motherfuckers. It's time to go. All I want to do is fucking eat.
We're not practicing to beat somebody. We're practicing to beat everybody.
Nowhere to run and nowhere to hide for 4 quarters. They got to see us in our house for 4 quarters. They got to look us in the eye for 4. This is about us and our family and our house. This is about us. This is our mentality. We ain't backing down. We ain't running. Set a tone, send a message. This is our house. Physical toughness wins in football now. And if you in this room, you got it. And if you come in here, you better believe in it. Because this physical toughness, it's what makes the difference. Elite focus. That's all I'm doing. The guy across from me, I'm fixing to whip his ass. Not in my box, not today. It's about us. It's about our family. We attack. You take that helmet and you strike them. And you strike them and you strike them. That's how you get respect.
I am going to pick shit out of them. Physically, I want to break them.
Welcome to 2024. Welcome back in for another edition of How About That Dawgscast. Now, as I was saying, the last week of the year, I found myself thinking about what I was going to do for this episode. And while I was thinking, I kept watching those like year in review videos and just thinking about how I wish I was more, I don't know, what's the word, witty, a little bit funnier, stuff like that, because people do a really good job creating those year in review videos. And I don't know how witty or funny I can be, but I did think it would be cool to kind of sit back and give a review of what happened for Georgia this year, the Georgia football program. And I'm talking about the calendric year, not the season. I've already done a season review. We've kind of beaten that horse to death, if you will. But here we are. Now we're looking ahead to 2024. But before we can let it go, I just think we ought to look back at what's happened in the last calendar year. So, of course, 2023 started in magnificent fashion for the Bulldogs, right? I mean, how are we ever going to forget the Midnight Miracle? That's what some people call it. When the Dogs beat Ohio State at the gun as the clock struck midnight to send themselves back to the national championship game with a chance to make it 2 in a row. And, of course, they cashed that in about a week later against TCU in the national championship game by the measure of 65-7. Like, they really, they blew them out of the water. They knew before the game started they were going to get that victory. They played with supreme confidence and did the one thing that nobody else has been able to do in the 4-team college football playoff era, and that is win back-to-back national championships. And, of course, immediately, we couldn't even celebrate that until people started talking about the possibility of a three-peat. And that's heady waters, right? That's a heady space to be in when you're thinking about that. Like, even to put yourself in position to have a chance to consider that is the kind of thing that very, very few programs have ever had the opportunity to do. But yet, there the Dogs were with a chance to make history. Now, we all knew it was going to be a long shot. There are so many things that can go against you. I talked about it here many, many times. Could be injuries, could be a funny bounce of the ball. You have no way of knowing. But the Dogs were going to accept the challenge and give it their best shot. And then just a week later, not even a week later, Georgia, the program, all of Dog Nation, was struck with the tragic loss of Devin Willock and Chandler LaCroix in a car accident that took the lives of those 2 young people and injured others that were involved in the accident. Dog Nation mourned. It felt like that hung over the program for the better part of the spring. It was almost like we couldn't wait for something to happen to help us move beyond it. And then it's not like you're ever going to leave that behind because of their contributions to the program and because of the individuals that they were. But as we know, time heals all wounds. And as we moved further away from those tragic incidents, we started to think about what the football team was going to look like moving forward. And that's not a calloused thing to do, because when tragedy strikes in life, the one thing you can do is move forward and continue about your life. And that's what the college football world did. That's what the University of Georgia football program did. But every step along the way, they had Devin and Chandler in their memory. And what better way to honor anyone than to honor someone's memory with the way you go about your business moving forward? Once we got to February, it was actually, and this is kind of the funny thing about all this as we started to move forward. When all of that happened, A Damn Beast Media, as you know it today, as I know it today, did not exist. I had not yet made the decision to dive wholeheartedly into what I was thinking about at the time. But on February 14th, the day after my daughter's birthday, Valentine's Day, for those of you who keep track of such things, I decided to launch A Damn Beast Media. And from that point forward, I have been focused like a laser on doing nothing except providing the very best Georgia football content that I can provide from a perspective that only I can bring, just given my history, my professional life, my experiences over the last quarter century in and around the sport. And it's all I've been focused on. I woke up that morning knowing that the YouTube channel was live, knowing that all of the social media pages were going to be live. My head was spinning with ideas and just wondering, how am I going to fill all this time between February and the start of the 2024 season? Let me tell you, it's kind of like the coaches. Once the regular season ends and transfer portal hits and recruiting is right around the corner, and if you happen to be in a championship game, you still have a game to coach for. That was my experience, because on February 14th, a lot of news was breaking in Athens, Georgia. That was the day that Todd Monken announced that he was going to go become the offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, this was not a completely unexpected move, but needless to say, Dog Nation was sad to see him go because of the experiences we had just had. Back-to-back national championships, record-setting offenses. It felt like the kind of thing that could shake a program. Not even an hour later, Kirby Smart stepped up and named a new offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, to the position. And I know I was someone who was never down or against Bobo. I was never down on him. I thought he was going to do a good job. I said as much here repeatedly. But Dog Nation essentially was a hornet's nest. Everybody had a take. Everybody had something to say about Mike Bobo and the direction of the Georgia football program. So this was a program coming off of back-to-back national championships that was being questioned, I mean, in a very real sense, by its very own fan base. It's like they had not seen the last 2 years. Like they had no experience with Kirby Smart as the head coach in Athens. It was a wild time. And here I was just finding my footing on all of these new platforms. Got to be honest, I felt like I was drowning. But we stayed afloat and we kept moving. And needless to say, I didn't know how much busier I was going to be the rest of the year. I didn't know that we were just getting started. So let's flash forward 1 month. March 14th, Dogs open spring practice. At this point, we're worried about the offensive coordinator. We're worried about who's going to be the quarterback. That was the big story. I mean, I had my opinions. I shared them here. I tried to share them in a way that would make Dog Nation feel more comfortable about what I thought was coming. But once again, this was the kind of thing. It's a hot button issue and everybody has a take. Everybody wants to put their spin on who they think was going to be the next quarterback at the University of Georgia. Carson Beck, Brock Vandegrift, and Gunnar Stockton were the three big names in the running there. We all knew Carson had the inside track on it, but there were a lot of people who were calling for Vandegrift. There were a lot of people who were calling for Gunnar Stockton to get a shot. And they all had their chances to show what they could do. It's just that you and I couldn't see them firsthand because they closed practices. And Kirby's tight-lipped about the whole thing until he wasn't. When one day in the summer, he just up and casually says, well, Carson Beck's going to be our starter. Talk about catching everybody flat-footed. We all knew what was going to happen. Well, not all of us. Some of us knew what was going to happen. But then Kirby just steps right up there and says so. It was pretty cool the way he did it. It was in true Kirby fashion. Now, the quarterback battle played out, but we started to see one of the things that was going to play a big role in Georgia's 2024 season. Well, there were a couple of things. One, the presence of a lot of young players, mid-year enrollees, true freshmen, that were making a splash at spring and were going to push for playing time come the fall. You could already see it. And if you went to G-Day, you absolutely saw it live and in person. And then the injuries started to leak out. The news of this person tweaked this, or not great news today, we think so-and-so sat out of practice because of an injury. And there were a lot of muddied waters around that time, and none of it seemed too serious. Everybody seemed to think that people missing time like Smile Munden, like Branson Robinson, and others, Michael Williams, we were going to see them again in the fall. They were going to heal up and they were going to be fine. That's what we all believed. But those injuries were there. And who could have argued the fact that they should not be playing in the spring, right? These were guys that had plenty of reps. They could get the mental reps. We just wanted them to get well and be ready to go in the fall. But that's where we were in the spring. Spin it forward one more month. It's tax day, April 15th, the day after my birthday, and we were in Athens for G-Day. That morning, as if we hadn't had enough going on at the University of Georgia in the spring, news broke that Bear Alexander had decided to enter the transfer portal in that second window. That's fine. We want people who want to be in Athens to be in Athens. But the fact of the matter is, around the transfer portal, you can still lose good players. It doesn't matter the reason. Maybe they're not happy. Maybe they're chasing something that's more important to them. Or maybe it's just a process that they're not going to see the field. That wasn't the case with Bear. He was a player that, although wasn't good enough to break into the starting lineup at that point, he was a good football player for the University of Georgia, and him being on the roster would have made them better. Now he was gone, and it seemed to shock all of us. Another name I could point to that left earlier in the year was A.D. Mitchell. He went to Texas. That's another instance of a quality player that would have made Georgia better who was not on the roster this year. So in the spring, we could already see that injuries were sort of messing around with the roster a little bit. Transfer portal was sort of having an impact, and we still had very high hopes that we could plug all the holes and everything would be fine. G-Day goes off without a hitch. It's a beautiful day. We see a lot of those young players that I was talking about earlier stepping up and making plays for the Dogs there. Me and my family went. We had a great day. If you were in Athens, I'm sorry I didn't get to say, hey, I hate I missed you. But we had a really good time. And then we put Georgia football to bed, sort of. It was a little bit of a dry run, as it is for most schools, between the end of spring practice and once you get back into summer workouts. For Georgia, that wasn't exactly the way it went. Because of the success that they had had in the last two seasons, everybody knew the kind of team and the kind of players Georgia had. So on April 27th, when the NFL draft rolled around, Georgia had another 10 players drafted, giving them a total of 25 players drafted in the NFL by the NFL over 2 seasons, which is an NFL record, including another 3 first-round draft picks. So just to sort of frame this again, we see that injuries were starting to pop up and be an issue. We see that the roster was being depleted and was turning over due to transfer portal, graduation, things like that. That's great news for the players that were taken in the draft. But Kirby and that coaching staff and all those young players had a lot of work to do to get ready for what was going to have to come together as a solid team if they were actually going to push for that three-peat in 2024. Now, that's when Georgia hit the same kind of lull, the same kind of quiet window that most teams do. And it's to be expected. There's nothing going on there. You have the occasional recruiting commitment announcement, including one this year from Dylan Raiola for the Georgia Bulldogs. And we were all very excited about it. But we know how that story ended. It's just another example of the ups and downs and the twists and turns in any recruiting battle in any given year. However, once we got to June and July, we saw the University of Georgia go on a tear when it comes to the recruiting trail. It seemed like every day they had a new commitment from another 4-star, another 5-star. We were talking about guys that were out there along the offensive lines, along the linebacker positions, at cornerback, everywhere you wanted to look on the roster that Georgia needed to address a deficiency or maybe build depth. They were out there doing it, and those announcements seemed to come one after the other. By the end of that stretch in June and July, essentially Georgia had put this recruiting class to bed completely. The recruiting class that would turn out to be the number 1 recruiting class in the country, consensus for 2024. That's pretty impressive. I think Kirby talked about it just a couple of days ago when he said ours, meaning Georgia's recruiting class, ours was put to bed pretty early. Like, we didn't have to worry about it when National Signing Day actually came, because the people who had said they were going to come to Georgia came to Georgia. And more than that, there was a little bit of drama on signing day that we didn't see coming. So Georgia is still killing it out there on the recruiting trail. Kirby Smart has to be, at this point, the undisputed top recruiting head coach in the country based on top 3 recruiting class after top 3 recruiting class. They're there year after year. Nobody's doing it quite like Georgia is right now. So that moves us along. We're in the quiet window there in the summer, and SEC Media Days pops up, and we start to think about college football again. Yours truly found himself in Nashville, Tennessee, covering SEC Media Days this year, and that was a great trip. It was a great week full of memories that I'm never going to forget. We heard a lot of good news and a lot of prognostications about who Georgia was, what they were going to be. We started to see the all-SEC teams be voted on and come out and be announced. We were in, preview magazine season is what we start to call it before we get into truly talking season leading up to the beginning of the season. It was really a whole lot of fun, but now we were starting to think about college football again in a very serious kind of way. At SEC Media Days this year, Kirby left us with a true gem that we, really came to embrace over the course of the year, which was better never rests. And he explained that the University of Georgia is actually, their biggest issue heading into 2023 was going to be fighting complacency. Now that the season is done, when I look back at what happened and what occurred and who did what for this team this year, the one thing that I would say is that complacency was never the problem in Athens. That was not something that had to be, yes, they had to fight against it, but it was not the kind of thing that was going to derail this program and their pursuit of that very, very elusive three-peat in college football. Something that had never been done since, in the modern age, since 1936, I believe it was the last time a team had gone 3 consecutive years winning a national championship. So, yes, the Dogs had a tall order in front of them, but it looked as though they were going to be up to the challenge as we headed into fall camp and into fall. Now, speaking of fall camp, August 2nd is when we got that kicked off. And at this point, everybody is downhill to college football. That's all anybody wants to talk about. You go on YouTube, you go on TikTok, you go on any traditional broadcast media. The thing that they wanted to do was give you some new preview, team preview, prognostication, who's going to make what in the playoff, who's going to win every conference. You know what I'm talking about. We all live for it, and we all love it. And we had players back on the field with pads on, actually doing work to get ready for actual games. And it was very exciting. But that injury thing that had started to show its head back in the spring reared its head again in fall camp for the Dogs. And there were a lot of guys that missed time. Smile Munden missed some time. Michael Williams missed a little bit of time before making his way back completely. Ladd McConkey missed a little bit of time. There were more than I'm listing here who had missed some time, including Branson Robinson. He was still healing from an injury. and they were bringing him back slowly, when for him and for Georgia's program as a whole, disaster struck because Branson suffered a patella injury, which cost him the entire 2023 season. And then we looked up and Kendall Milton was having a hamstring issue, and that cost him a lot of reps. And then Dejon Edwards had a knee injury, and now he's missing reps. Tight end Lawson Lucky had an ankle injury, had to have surgery. These were all injuries that, with the exception of Branson's, that we thought we were going to get those guys back, but none of us knew exactly what it was going to take for those players to get back. And it's not so much that they're not going to get back. It was that even once they got back, they still have to work themselves into the game plan, back into game shape, and all of that takes time. It's not something that was used as an excuse by the team because they went out and handled their business. I know fans like to point to it, but every time we do, this is where, and it doesn't matter the team, even if you're simply telling the truth, people are going to say, well, that's an excuse. It's not. From my perspective, it's never going to be an excuse. When Georgia loses a game and a player happens to be injured, that's just part of the game. Case in point, the SEC championship game. Was Georgia completely healthy? No. Did it change the game? According to Nick Saban? Absolutely. That is not why I'm going to point to and say that's why Georgia lost the game. Georgia didn't play well enough to win the game. So, was it a factor? Yes. Is it the truth? Yes. But you will never hear me say that's why they lost. So, that's just something to file away, because we're going to get to that a little bit later here in this discussion as we make our way through the year. Now, on the whole, Georgia came through summer camp. We knew who our starting quarterback was going to be, and we were all ready to kick the season off. And after a month of games that left Georgia sort of flying beneath the national radar, because the games just weren't very exciting from a national perspective, there were still plenty of people out there that had a lot to say about what Georgia was going to be, because they were claiming they didn't know anything about Georgia because they hadn't played anyone. And the Dogs just put their head down and went to work. So after that first month, they were sitting there at 4-0 with one conference win and doing everything that they had been asked to do without players that they were heavily dependent on. They just went out and did what they needed to do. Then the Dogs had to make the road trip to Auburn. Now, this was a big deal because it was Carson Beck's first start on the road as an SEC starter, and Auburn is always a difficult place to play. As the season went on, we began to learn that Auburn had a pretty good defense. Offensively, they were on the struggle bus most of the year. But the way that game shook out, Georgia did what they needed to do to help Auburn out a little bit, and Auburn had some plays rigged up for Georgia, and they hit on them. And here we are in the fourth quarter, the second half, Georgia was down or tied, and they're in a fight. And Brock Bowers decides to go nuclear on the Auburn Tigers. He took the game over. That was a big day, not only because we got to see Brock Bowers in all of his number 19 glory for the University of Georgia, but we got to see Carson Beck grow up a little bit, show us he could get it done on the road, and we got to see Mike Bobo call plays and get the ball to his playmakers when it mattered most and help Georgia get the victory. That was a big game for a lot of reasons, some of which I just mentioned, and they would pull on it, reach back to it, and draw from it the rest of the season. The next week, the Dogs were back home, and Kentucky comes in undefeated and ranked, and the Dogs just blistered them. They beat Kentucky in every way that you could imagine and left everybody thinking after the fact, well, maybe Georgia has hit their stride. Maybe this is who they're going to be this year. Now, obviously, there's two parts to that, right? There is, That is who Georgia could be. If they're healthy, they have their players and, everything's going right. They execute. But on the other hand, Kentucky did what they always do, which is start fast. And then as we saw on the back half of the year, Kentucky kind of fell off. So, yeah, it was a great night for the Dogs as far as focusing on what the Georgia team did. Georgia focused on themselves. Georgia executed. Georgia played really, really well with really good talent. And that's what it looked like. But we learned later that Kentucky was a team that had some flaws. The next week, they had to make the trip to like the twilight zone of the SEC over the last couple of years, which is Vanderbilt University in Nashville. I mean, the stadium's not complete. There's construction everywhere. We know Georgia's going to take it over. And the worst thing that you could imagine happening to Georgia happens. Number 19 gets hurt. Brock Bowers goes down. And at that point, there were a lot of people across the country, including a sizable portion of the Johnny-come-lately Georgia Bulldog fans who had just written off the rest of the season. That's it. They're done. I said at the time, there's no way that Brock Bowers is not going to come back from this injury. If there's any way possible, he's going to fight and come back and play with his teammates. Because I believe that's just who the young man is. The next day, it was announced that he was going to have surgery to expedite his return with the intention of coming back as soon as possible. So, for once in a blue moon, I was right, and I was rewarded for the faith that I had in the young man and what he had shown us so far. So I was happy when Brock decided that he was going to come back, because not only did that mean good things for the Georgia football team, it just meant good things for a good story, right? Because nobody wanted to see one of the greatest players in the history of University of Georgia go out that way. Go out getting hurt on the road at Vanderbilt. That just wasn't the kind of ending anybody wanted to see for a damn good dog like Brock Bowers. So we had hope that he was going to make his way back, and we didn't know exactly when that was going to be, but we knew that he was going to do everything he could to get back. We had a bye week, and then Georgia was facing a bit of a gauntlet. A series of ranked teams, 4 consecutive games, where everybody seemed to say that Georgia was going to lose at least one through that stretch, in large part because they didn't know what was going to happen with Brock Bowers. And yet again, this team stepped up, stuck a finger in the leaky dam. They had players who the casual Georgia fan, the casual college football fan, may not know, step up and contribute in a way that allowed Georgia to play winning football as they defeated a Missouri team that wound up being a Cotton Bowl champion. They defeated a Florida team on the road in Jacksonville in, the biggest rivalry game of the year for the Dogs. And then they had Ole Miss at home, who was a top 10 team when they came a-calling, and Georgia put the hammer on them as well. That night was the night that Brock Bowers decided to return and write his story and end his season or his career the way he wanted to by scoring another touchdown between the hedges. And Georgia put one on Ole Miss that night in Athens. They finished out the regular season with a win over Tennessee, who we had all heard about all off season. Yet again, the Dogs put a whipping on the Volunteers up on Rocky Top. Wasn't close. I don't even know. The fact that Tennessee's not going to be on the 2024 schedule doesn't even hurt my feelings, because that game has become a game that Georgia doesn't even worry about anymore. So, yeah, I'm excited to see some other teams come on the schedule, because beating Tennessee at this point, it's just not bringing a whole lot of zing into the schedule for our Dogs. So they beat Tennessee. They beat the Yellow Jackets on the road. And then we head into the SEC championship game. Now, ultimately, the Dogs finished 12-0 in the regular season for the third consecutive year. The first team in the AP poll era to do that. Historic. Georgia finished a third consecutive season undefeated in conference play at 8-0. The only SEC team in Southeastern Conference history to win 8 games in each of 3 consecutive conference play seasons. Historic. Any way you slice it, what Georgia did in the regular season is something that will be remembered forever. They head into the SEC championship game, and things, of course, don't go the way that we all hoped that they would. A less than 100% Georgia team dropped the game on a Saturday that they couldn't afford to drop a game on. If they had lost one of those games earlier in the schedule somewhere, maybe that would have made a difference. Maybe something would have worked out to where that is not the day that things don't go Georgia's way. But as it were, Alabama showed up, they did what they had to do, and they won the conference. In a year unlike any other in college football, that loss crippled Georgia in the eyes of the selection committee. And it sent the Dogs an unprecedented 5-spot drop from number 1, the team that had been number 1 in everybody's eyes the entire season, fell 5 spots to number 6 and out of the college football playoff. There was nothing to be done or said at that point, really. I mean, it is what it is. But that's where this team had a choice to make. Were they going to be about what they said they're about, or were they going to fold their tent and break apart and everybody was going to do what was best for them? That was really the only choice that was left. Because SEC, the championship game, the selection Sunday, all of that happens. And then we had this break before the bowl game. The Dogs were slotted to play another grudge holding team in Florida State, who felt like they should have been in the playoff. But before we could go play that game in the Orange Bowl, we had to handle other business. National Signing Day had to be put to bed. The transfer portal starts to open up and things start popping across the country. There's so much to be said about the transfer portal and what it means and how it affects teams and how it affects our team. But that's not what we're going to spend too much time on here tonight, because you can take that conversation any number of directions. It deserves its own show where you do nothing except talk about it. And frankly, there's so much movement in and out of the portal for not only Georgia, but for all teams across the country. I'm basically taking the position that I'm not going to speak on it until that second window closes and we know who's on which roster. At that point, I think it's fair to evaluate where you are, what you have as you head into the next season. But it's something that the coaches have to manage. And Georgia, once again, has seen a lot of movement, which is not to be unexpected. But about the National Signing Day class, as I mentioned earlier, Georgia put this class to bed early in the year. Midsummer, they were essentially done. They were at over 25 commitments, promised scholarships for this 2024 signing class. And even if it hadn't happened, they were already in position to have the number 1 class when signing day was over. But on signing day itself, remember that mantra, better never rests? We thought Kirby Smart was just talking about what was happening on the football field. No, he showed us yet again that that mantra applies to everything in the Georgia football program. Better never rests. In the summer, KJ Bolden decided he was going to commit to the Florida State Seminoles. Better never rests. Kirby and his staff remained consistent in their recruitment of KJ Bolden. And on signing day, the number one player in the country at the safety position flipped his commitment from Florida State to the University of Georgia, putting a cherry on top of one of the greatest classes in the history of Georgia football. And of course, you can't bear that out until you see what they produce on the field. But as far as rankings are concerned, it's hard to see how this class could have been any better for the University of Georgia. And the experts agree. This is a consensus number one recruiting class for the Dogs, with a lot of players that are going to be expected to have instant impacts for the Dogs on the field in the fall. When you've got players like Julian Humphrey, whom I think is a fantastic player, who says, I'm thinking about entering the portal, and then says, no, wait, I'm going to stay. And then 2 days later says, wait, I'm actually going into the portal. And then the very next day comes back and says, I've changed my mind. I'm officially done. I'm staying at the University of Georgia. You have to have high school players who are coming into the program, who are mid-year enrollees, getting extra practices during bowl game week, getting the extra spring practice so that they can be ready to contribute to the team in the fall, because you just never know who's going to be there for you that is already on your roster, thanks to the transfer portal. So these players that Georgia signed, they're not just signing to sit. They're signing to come in and compete. And they're going to have every opportunity to do that and to make their presence felt on the roster and on the field for the Dogs in 2024. Anywhere between 40 and 60% of Georgia's roster this year is going to be made up of players that are in year 1 or 2 in the program. By definition, this is an extremely young football team. And I have absolute and total faith that these are the kind of players that are going to want to make the investment in themselves and in the program, and that this is the coaching staff that is going to pour into these young men to get them ready to participate and contribute for the Dogs in 2024. Finally, we move beyond National Signing Day. New Dogs in the fold. The transfer portal still out there doing what it's doing. There's nothing any of us can do about that. We can just ride the wave and see where we end up. But then there was a football game to play. And a choice had to be made. Georgia had to make a choice, as did Florida State. You had the opportunity, you had the choice to show up and fight for the season that you had and finish it the right way, to play alongside your teammates and finish what you started. Or you could choose to sit the game out, not finish what you started, and not represent your university in a way that every fan and player could be proud of. You would have to say that Florida State chose the latter. And we know for certain that the Georgia Bulldogs chose the former. Georgia destroyed Florida State in the Orange Bowl to be Orange Bowl champions yet again. And they did it by a score of 63-3. They crushed the Seminoles by 60 points. Now, I don't care who played for them and who didn't. When you put the helmet on and you step on the field, if you say, if any player, Georgia player or not, says that the game doesn't matter, we weren't ready, we were not invested, we were not interested in playing, that's even worse than going out there, giving it your best, and getting beat by 3 touchdowns. It's worse. So I don't ever want to hear that. And I don't want to hear it from Florida State or anybody else. You don't want to play? Don't put the uniform on. But the team is still the team. And the score is still the score. And at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that Georgia, once again, is record-setting in what they're accomplishing. Georgia defeated TCU 65-7 last year to win the national title. This year, they defeated Florida State 63-3, becoming the first program to score 56 points or more in back-to-back bowl games. The Dogs set the record for the largest margin of victory in a bowl game last year over TCU, 65-7. Then they turned right around, showed up, showed out, and broke their own record a year later against Florida State, winning by 60 in a CFP bowl game. The CFP bit just makes it that much more impressive. We're not talking about some lower tiered bowl that nobody's in the stands to witness. When the lights were the brightest, this Georgia team showed up and did everything that they said they were about the entire season. That was the choice. That's what they decided to do. To a man, Georgia didn't have a clear opt-out. They were without 20-something players, 27 players, I think it was, if you factor in transfer portal and injury where players could not play. And they still put on a performance like that. Makes me proud as a University of Georgia alum, as a Georgia Bulldog fan. That's the way I want my team, my university to be represented, regardless of who the opponent is. Nameless, faceless. It's about us. How many times have you heard Kirby Smart say that? All that time, the entire month of December, there was a band of clowns, and I wish I could have seen the car that they were riding around in, honestly. I know that the joke is you get so many clowns into a little small clown car. There were so many clowns running around saying this game doesn't matter. The players are going to opt out. Nobody cares. It's a participation game. Well, Kirby gave us a little view, a little peek behind the curtain about the fact that, yeah, he says he doesn't listen to it, and he doesn't. He doesn't have time. But there are people around him who make sure that he sees certain things. And on the podium in the Orange Bowl, Kirby took every one of those clowns to task. Everybody said nobody cares. Nobody's going to show up. Nobody should play. These guys care. That's what Kirby said. And he did it standing on a podium accepting a trophy for a game where his team had just defeated their opponent by 60 points in a record-setting historic performance. Mic drop moment if you're Kirby Smart. Culture game if you are the University of Georgia. That's what it speaks to. It speaks to the culture at the University of Georgia, what they have built during Kirby Smart's time there. There were two models on display in this Orange Bowl game. There's the Dawgs model, which is built from within on high school recruiting and development of players. Then there is the Florida State model, which is the mercenary model. You bring in players, you have a great season, but the minute it doesn't break their way, the minute it doesn't suit them, those mercs, they can't be bothered. They're on to their next mission. Culture. That's what won the game in the Orange Bowl by the margin that it was won for the Georgia Bulldogs. That can't be disputed. You can love it or hate it. That is the difference between the Georgia football program and all but one or two other programs in the country. Because the portal is so tempting. Let me just go get what I need. It takes time, investment, and development to do what Kirby's done at Georgia. I don't think he's going to stray from it. I think that's what it's going to be. He's going to do what he needs to do to give his team an advantage and to improve his roster whenever necessary. Make no mistake. But the core of this team is always going to be high school recruiting and player development. All in all, you may have lost it. You may not have thought about it. But Georgia football is sitting here with yet another 13-win season. That's 3 consecutive 13-win seasons for the Georgia Bulldogs. I said it prior to this year, and I'm going to say it from now until something dramatically changes. Forget conference realignment. The thing that's going to determine who wins the national title moving forward is simply going to be who's willing to make the investments in their programs to put themselves in position to do so. That is 10 schools or fewer. And when I say 10, I'm being extremely generous. It's really more like 8. Schools that are going to make the investment, have the alignment within the program, have the consistency at every level, the strain for excellence in every area to put themselves in position to actually win a national championship every year. Notice I didn't say they're going to win it every year. I said to put themselves in a position to win it. And no, I don't just mean making the new 12-team playoff. There are at least 4 teams that are going to make that new playoff that have 0 shot at winning it. At the end of the day, I think you're still going to be looking at those same 8 teams that are going to have a legitimate shot to win the national title. And you can bet your bottom dollar that as long as Kirby Paul Smart is the head coach at the University of Georgia, the Georgia Bulldogs are going to be among that group. So everybody in every corner of the internet can say whatever they want about hoping and wishing that the University of Georgia is going to fall off or take some step back. And I'm just going to sit back and remind them, not as long as Kirby Smart is the head coach at Georgia. Wish every wish you want on a Disney star. The team that's in Athens is not going anywhere anytime soon. So there you have it. That's my review, calendric review of the Dawgs 2023 year, including the season, because we went way back to the spring. If you can think of anything that I may have missed along the way, anything that you thought was really important across the course of the season, please leave it in the comments below. Let me know, because I'd love to remember it with you. There were countless great plays, big moments in games. I didn't even take the time to get into any of that stuff. So let me know. Let me know what meant the most to you in the 2023 season. 13 wins, an Orange Bowl championship, and they closed it out with the #1 recruiting class in the country heading into 2024. I mean, I don't know about you, but I agree with Kirby.
So how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.
And I don't think that we have anything to worry about moving forward. They're going to keep working. They're going to be there when game time comes in the fall. And I love the schedule that's in front of us. It is going to be challenging. Make no mistake. But it is the kind of schedule that is going to keep us glued to the TV screen every week, bring new drama for our Dogs every Saturday, And it's all going to be must-see TV as we head into 2024. We're going to see the Texas Longhorns. We're going to see the Crimson Tide. We're going to see an overhauled Ole Miss on the road. This is going to be an exciting season. I, for one, am looking forward to it, and I'm certain that you are too. So until the next time we come together, let's cheer on them dogs. Remember, spring practice is going to be here before you know it. So get your ducks in a row, get all your tailgate stuff ready. Don't bury it behind all the Christmas goodies when you take down all the decorations for the holiday season, because you're going to need it again real soon. I know I, for one, can't wait to pull out all my red and black stuff yet again, even though it's not like it ever really goes anywhere. So until next time, y'all take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and go Dogs!
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.